Hello everyone! Today's Ancient and Medieval Adventures lesson is all about dragons in global mythology. Dragon myths come from all around the world on different continents like Asia, Africa, Europe, and even in the country Australia. Long ago, all of these countries had their own ideas about dragons, and there were many different local legends about them. Dragons had different characteristics depending on various cultures, but most tended to have some similarities. Some of the things that mythical dragons around the world tend to have in common are fire and water. Dragons are almost always associated with one of these things, and they often have the ability to breathe fire. Treasure. Dragons are often said to be the guardians of great hoards of treasure. Protectors. No matter their allegiance, dragons often exist to protect something: people, land, gold, etc. So if all these different cultures and people around the world had their own version of the dragon myth, where did the myth come from? Many of these groups of people did not communicate with each other in ancient and medieval times because they didn't live in a globalized world with cell phones and technology like we do now. So how did all of these different cultures have their own dragon myth? We will try to answer these questions in the following slides. The myth of dragons might be inspired by dinosaur fossils. In some ancient civilizations, when people found dinosaur bones, they believed that they belonged to dragons. A Chinese historian, Chan Chu, once mislabeled a dinosaur fossil as a dragon bone, and when you compare a picture of a dragon to the dinosaur fossil, it's easy to understand why. Native to sub-Saharan Africa, there were many Nile crocodiles that may have inspired myths of dragons. Nile crocodiles are one of the largest crocodile species in the world and can reach up to 18 feet in length. That's about as long as an adult giraffe is tall. 18 feet would make a pretty sizable dragon. Australia has monitor lizards that could have inspired their take on the myth of dragons. These lizards are called goannas, and they have razor-sharp teeth and claws. They are also important animals in Aboriginal folklore in Australia. Some scholars argue that whales inspired the myth of dragons. In ancient civilizations, whale bones may have been discovered, and humans did not realize that whales existed in the sea, because whales spend 90% of their lives underwater and people didn't see them very often. So when whales died and their bones washed up on shores, humans would find them and think that they belonged to dragons instead of realizing that they came from a whale. The last theory about the origin of the myth of dragons is super cool. Anthropologist David E. Jones says that the belief in dragons was so great because evolution has implanted a fear of predators in the human mind. Evolution is the theory that humans evolved from apes and from other earlier animals over the course of millions of years as they slowly changed. So even though humans have no natural predators now because we are at the top of the food chain, we did in the past, and that fear remains. These fears have combined with folklore to create the myth of dragons and other fearsome monsters. All of these theories help explain how different cultures that didn't talk to each other may have come up with similar myths. Now we're going to take a look at different dragons around the world, starting with the ones in Europe. In most European folklore, dragons were described as giant winged serpents, often with magical abilities. Dragons appear many times in medieval manuscripts. An example of one of these manuscripts is from a man named Geoffrey of Monmouth. Geoffrey of Monmouth was a Welsh monk in the 12th century, about 900 years ago. He wrote a famous story in his History of the Kings of Britain about a warlord named Vortigern who was trying to build a defensive tower on top of Mount Snowdon. However, every time Vortigern made progress in building the tower, it mysteriously crumbled to the ground. Vortigern was then informed by Merlin that the tower collapsed because underneath the mountain there was a pool with 2 dragons in it. In many Asian cultures, dragons are symbols of luck, power, and strength. They were frequently depicted as long snakes with 4 legs. Dragons in Asia are associated with water and are sometimes said to have control over rain, typhoons, and floods. In Australia, dragons were also known as rainbow serpents by Aboriginal cultures and were sometimes said to be the creator, the being that made the world. A part of Australian mythology says that when there's a rainbow in the sky, it is a dragon moving from one watering hole to the next. Because of its association with water, the rainbow serpent is known as a life giver, but can also be destructive when angry. In ancient Egyptian mythology, there was a giant serpent named Apep who lived in the underworld and was the god of chaos. In some of the oldest Egyptian accounts, the setting of the sun every day was when Ra, the sun god, descends into the underworld to fight Apep. Thunderstorms and lightning were the roaring of Apep, and solar eclipses were believed to be caused by Apep leaving the underworld to fight Ra in the sky. It's very interesting that so many different cultures around the world develop myths and beliefs about giant serpents or dragons. Although the characteristics of dragons vary around the world, there are a few elements that they tend to have in common, including a connection to fire or water, a love of treasure and gold, and that they are fearsome protectors. There are several theories about the origin of dragon myths, such as dinosaur fossils, the bones of whales or crocodiles, or just that humans have a natural fear of giant predators, whether real or mythical. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this lesson on dragons from Mage Magical Creatures, brought to you by Ancient and Medieval Adventures at the Museum of Antiquities.